Whoever you are, whatever you're convinced is true, wherever that crazy notion came from, hello. Before we start, I want to talk to you about the genetic fallacy. I cut this bad argument from Wiggle Soup episode 12 mostly for time reasons. There really are so many logical fallacies out there to choose from. But this episode, the genetic fallacy, is going to be important. Imagine I told you that I know that the Earth is round because I saw a picture once in a comic book. Or perhaps I'm convinced that speed equals distance over time because an invisible dragon once whispered it to me in my sleep. In both these cases, the truth of the claim has nothing to do with where the information comes from. The strength of an argument rests on the evidence that supports it, not the source of the information. In The Boy Who Cried Wolf, the genetic fallacy was the village's undoing. Because the boy had been known to lie, the villagers didn't take his final warning seriously. If you know that someone is trying to sell you a product and they make a commission on every product they sell, you'll be right not to trust them completely. But that doesn't mean that every claim they make about the product is automatically false. People's beliefs can be true even if they come with an agenda, were communicated to them supernaturally, or originate from unscientific texts. With that caveat out of the way, we're ready to ask the question, why might somebody believe something without testable, verifiable evidence to back it up? We can't know anything for certain. Even the world itself, that one sprawled out around you, on which all of us depend for survival, cannot be said to exist with indisputable certainty. Even when your beliefs are backed up with multiple first-hand accounts and constantly reinforced through daily experience, to claim that you know something, anything, about reality is a leap of faith. But this doesn't make all leaps of faith equal. The fact that the world is home to thousands of mutually incompatible religions shows us that the strength of someone's convictions and how dedicated they are to their beliefs tells us absolutely nothing about whether those beliefs are true. When two contradictory claims bump into one another, we discover a fountain of reasons to believe in something other than what can be demonstrated. Like it or not, all of us hold certain biases. See Wiggle Soup episode 9 for details. Once we've arrived at the restaurant of life and taken a seat at the dinner table, it's a real hassle to have to move again. Once we've got ourselves comfortable and made friends with those around us, it's easier to insist that we love the food that's within reach, rather than have to find a new seat. If our confirmation bias or indoctrination are strong enough, then any belief that we hold may appear to be the only rational one. From a very young age, many children are taught that human beings have souls. If their scout leaders tell them ghost stories, and the cartoons they watch depict spirits rising up out of corpses, and their parents console them with stories that dead relatives are watching over them from heaven, children become conditioned to accept spiritual explanations for earthly phenomena. Once the idea of a separate spiritual existence has been established, then the idea that other spiritual beings, like angels or demons, might exist seems quite plausible, if not obvious. Far from contradicting each other, the two ideas fit comfortably together, reinforcing what the person has always felt acceptable to believe. However, those same people that believe in souls, ghosts, benevolent and malign spirits may be highly skeptical of alien abductions. The selectivity of a person's belief has nothing to do with what's actually true, or even what evidence exists to support it, only how easily new information fits the mental mold. Demonic possession and divine intervention might make perfect sense to some people, even if the Illuminati and the Loch Ness Monster seem to them completely absurd. So how does all this happen? What advantage could unfalsifiable conjecture have offered our ancestors, allowing them to survive and the mental shortcut to persist to this day? Obviously, if there really is a monster living under your bed, waiting for you to fall asleep so it can leap out and kill you, waiting for there to be more evidence is not the best idea. Filtering reality through all of our prior beliefs and biases is certainly convenient and makes for much quicker decision-making. This is fine as long as such epistemological laziness doesn't harm you in any way. But can these biases, inclinations, and gut feelings ever be useful? Right from birth, new humans will show an attention bias towards certain kinds of objects. They learn very quickly that inanimate objects, like rocks, must be contacted by something else in order to move. But living objects, like animals and people, can move all by themselves. A ball has to be pushed by something to travel any distance. A dog doesn't need to be pushed, depending on the dog. Building off of this inbuilt intuition, infants realize that conscious agents will act in pursuit of their own goals. Now, if a ball is seen rolling down a hill without anyone obviously kicking it, it must have wanted to move. Whenever an effect can be observed without the cause being strictly visible or known, conscious agency can be invoked to plug gaps in worldly knowledge. Another way to tie up these messy loose ends is to attribute a purpose to all things. We don't need to ask why a frog eats flies, as long as we can assume that a frog is for eating flies. That's just what they do. And what's the harm in that? Well, for a start, assuming agency and purpose where there is none makes children highly susceptible to superstitious thinking. It's as if the development of the mind itself creates an empty compartment that's ready for any culture's myths and deities to move in. All that's required to summon a god of the gaps is an indication that others might exist who possess a full and complete knowledge of all things. And it just so happens that most children have a pair of good reasons for believing this. Generally speaking, whenever a child encounters an insurmountable problem, there exists a ready-made, one-size-fits-all, universal solution that keeps on giving. Ask your parents. These two all-knowing oracles of the universe are almost always available for consultation. It must be so comforting to know that they hold the key to all life's difficulties. As adults, however, we are flailing in the dark, with no access to such unquestionable guidance. To cope with all of this chaos, we've learned to outsource different aspects of our thinking to other people. A reverence for the verdicts of college professors, radio DJs, authors, podcasters, newsreaders, friends, and celebrities at least gives us a manageable shortlist of workable options. Thoroughly researching all of our beliefs and ideas takes effort. It feels good not to have to think for ourselves about everything. Just like when we were children, we've become dependent on their wisdom. Why go through the ordeal of constructing your opinion from scratch when you can just borrow one from what's readily at hand? This natural tendency to allow or even invite others to tell us what to think and what to do and how to feel is what Immanuel Kant called man's self-imposed immaturity. In his own words, quote, "It's so easy to be immature. If I have a book to serve as my understanding, a pastor to serve as my conscience, a physician to determine my diet for me, and so on, I need not exert myself at all. I need not think if only I can pay. Others will readily undertake the irksome work for me." Are there any other reasons why someone might be reluctant to change places at the dinner table once they've sat down? What about comfort? It's relatively safe and easy to remain where you are or where you are put once your seat is warm and your muscles, or in this case your brain, has relaxed. Thinking for yourself is bound to be very unpleasant if the brain has atrophied like a disused limb. Building strength in our convictions takes time and training. Another disincentive to shift might well be cowardice. Who knows what lies down the other end of the table or what unfamiliar guests might think of us? All people, myself included, often lack the courage to stand up and use their intellectual abilities. They might leave their seat for a little while, take a walk around, develop their own thoughts, opinions, ethics, morality, and completely fail to cope. Then others that witness this happening are going to be even more keen to keep their heads down. Why risk it? Our childhood fears and insecurities never really go away. Perhaps this is why it's so commonly suggested that all humans are born believers, so ready to give away their own thoughts to others. We are naturally inclined to find religious, supernatural, or conspiratorial claims attractive when faced with the vast, complex, unpredictable, and often painful universe. It's very difficult to accept reality on reality's terms, so we end up finding something that works and then lie to ourselves about its certainty. Although our beliefs tell us nothing about the truth until those beliefs can be demonstrated, willingness to accept superstitious explanations may be an evolutionary byproduct. Any useless part of a creature's anatomy or behavior that doesn't impose a cost to survival or reproduction can persist indefinitely within a population. This is known as a spandrel in evolutionary circles. Before we wag a finger at bugs in the programming, let's first appreciate the powerful cognitive equipment that we've inherited from our ancestors, and how it affords us some pretty incredible superpowers. Amongst our intellectual weaponry, humans boast imagination. Prior to achieving any goal, we have to imagine that we'll get some reward for doing so. By visualizing hypothetical outcomes, we can mentally project a series of realistic steps to success. This is mental time travel. Once we can see things in our mind's eye that do not actually exist in reality, we are capable of mentally transporting ourselves forwards and backwards in time. Remembering and inferring past events, whilst predicting what the future might hold, is so incredibly useful I can't possibly do it justice. But there's more. Imagination can be a creative process, not just a predictive one. Humans have learnt to perceive and organize the world using shared abstract concepts. Sometimes it's not enough to simply know what an apple tastes like and how to acquire one. By creating, comprehending, and manipulating ideas in our minds, like language, art, and numeracy, we can ask each other, what is an apple worth? Could other things be made into pies? And how much custard is too much? Because these superpowers operate automatically and effortlessly in modern humans, we are left tragically vulnerable to false positives. You may have heard of, and I bet you've experienced, a phenomena called pareidolia. This is our species' hair-trigger system for detecting human faces. It's why we so often perceive smiles, or frowns, or grumpy expressions in the formation of clouds, or in burnt toast, or in the shadows on the moon. Other perceptual malfunctions in our brain wiring present as irate conversations with inanimate objects. So many people project malice onto the mundane and infer meaning in the events of their life, where absolutely none exists. How many times have I sworn at my computer for being so slow, or insisted that my second-hand car is an absolute bust? So what do you get when you mix abstract concepts to mental time travel, encase it with imagination, and bake it until it's symbolic? You get a working recipe for belief in the supernatural. To survive on the African savannah, our ancestral homeland, our ancestors had to take in information through their limited senses and look for patterns. Their pattern detection systems only had to be good enough to keep them alive and their children safe, at least until they could reproduce themselves. All of our evolved adaptations only had to be satisficing, which is a real word. I looked it up. Most of the time, a gentle swaying and fluxing of the long grass was just caused by the wind. An ancient hunter-gatherer, believing that those rustling noises indicated a snake or other dangerous predator, would probably be wrong most of the time. A classic false positive. But the cost of processing information that leads to a false positive would have been minimal. You might lose a little food, a little time and energy, and look a little foolish. But on the other hand, a false negative, assuming that the wind is to blame when actually there is a deadly threat approaching, could cost the person their entire life, plus the lives of any dependent offspring, plus the lives of any future offspring they might have brought to the dinner table. It was therefore beneficial in the long run for our ancestors to believe that the world was out to get them, even though their relative safety was far more likely most of the time. And if you hadn't already guessed, we are all descended from ancestors that chose to believe rather than stick around to find out. The fact that predators also need to gather information through their senses means that they can be outsmarted in their attempts to do us harm. Some things, like floods and earthquakes and electric storms that create forest fires, have no consciousness or directed intent. Other things, like predatory animals and rival tribe members, do have directed intent, which means they can be outsmarted. In the absence of more reliable information, An intuitive belief that all forces possess some degree of agency can improve human survival at very little cost. The calculated risk to occasionally detect patterns in information where none exist is precisely what generates belief in supernatural forces. This is not just an inevitable flaw in human thinking, it's a very useful feature. Or at least, it was. So how can we keep our beliefs in check today? How might we scrutinize our assumptions to live in the most accurate approximation of reality available to us? For a start, we must keep in mind that our beliefs and behaviors are often propagated through neutrality. They don't hurt us. Appreciating that many of our attitudes and predilections are reflexive, natural, cheap, and meaningless gives us hope that they can all be overcome through formal education if that's what we want. Realizing why our minds play host to so many natural superstitious tendencies, it's very easy to see why gods provide such a satisfying explanation for all that we see in the world. It's really difficult to imagine how religious thinking could have been avoided once we appreciate the historic merits of superstitious behavior. However, certain ancient supernatural beliefs can be extremely limiting and damaging and harmful in the modern world. The trick is to augment our natural cognitive superpowers with science and evidence and empiricism, transcending our biological limitations, but without committing the genetic fallacy. Robust opinions supported by sophisticated logic and arguments and data should be more valuable to us than what's merely comforting. But we must not judge something as good or bad, right or wrong, on the basis of where it came from or from whom it came. Just because the invisible whispering dragon has never got a single thing wrong doesn't mean it never will. Now that we have some idea where our religiosity comes from and why we should stay skeptical, let's take a look back at the beginnings of religion to see how our beliefs have changed. Mental time travel is brilliant.